The Genesis Talks is like a beating heart of ideas and connections. Conversations with visionaries, luminaries that never lets us get complacent.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're bringing together two leaders who run institutions on opposite coasts. But beyond their locations, I've come to think of them as directors cut from the very same cloth. Both Thelma Golden and Michael Govan understand something rare about running an institution, that the exhibitions on the walls and the people in the buildings are a part of the same project. They mount the shows and build institutions that change how we see art. Thelma Golden is the Ford Foundation Director and Chief Curator of the Studio Museum in Harlem, a role she's held since 2005. Over those 2 decades, she has curated landmark exhibitions like Freestyle, which introduced the world to artists including Mark Bradford and Rashid Johnson, and mentored a generation of curators and museum leaders now shaping institutions across the country. This past fall, that work culminated in something extraordinary: the opening of the Studio Museum's first purpose-built home in its nearly 60-year history, a $300 million undertaking that gave Harlem a museum as grand as the artist it has always championed. Please join me in welcoming Thelma Golden and Michael Govan.
Thank you, Naima. Thelma, it's
Michael.
amazing to have you here.
It's fantastic to be
We're
here.
all part of the Thelma fan club. I'm #1 member.
Thank you.
So when the Genesis series was proposed, we just said, like, which date will we have Thelma come to Los Angeles? Because you may not know this, but Thelma loves Los Angeles.
I love Los Angeles.
So Thelma, among her many accomplishments, I should note that Thelma is also on our board of trustees and is one of my bosses. So I have to be careful what I say. But
Yeah.
so I think the part of the idea behind these conversations was to have deeper conversations with people actually that I already know. And we have talked for many years. In fact, it's safe to say that we grew up together
Absolutely.
in the art world in New York in particular.
Mhm.
I think I joined the Guggenheim in 1988 when you joined the Whitney
Yes,
down the street.
exactly. I started working at the Whitney as an assistant in '88.
That's right.
So,
So we were colleagues and neighbors from that.
Mhm.
And then as our careers progressed, we intersected bits at a time.
Mhm.
And Thelma, when you sort of emerged as the person people know you as now, I remember when the Black Male show happened at the Whitney.
Mhm.
And that was, I mean, to this day, that might be one of the most landmark exhibitions that's ever been staged in New York, certainly in contemporary art and thinking.
Mhm.
So we can go back to your childhood, which would be really interesting. But can we start with that
Yeah.
formative moment? Because it took you from being, a curator at the Whitney, going from assistant to curator, and sort of put you on the world stage.
Mhm.
And, just having come through this, that wasn't the easiest process. I mean, now we look back and think of that exhibition as one of the most important exhibitions, again, that's been staged in New York in contemporary art. But it was complicated.
Mhm.
And just since a lot of people have been talking about this place and everyone has an opinion,
Mhm.
as we know from the newspapers and now social media, we didn't have it then. I thought we could start with some tough questions about, like, how was that? That was such a crazy time when you made that exhibition. And I think the world wasn't quite ready for it. Certainly the New York Times wasn't ready for it.
Absolutely. So, well, I think it's important because we are in LA.
1994. Right?
94 in New
94.
York, November 95 in LA, March.
Right.
So
Came to the hammer
here right after. So I think of that all together. And it came right after I was part of the curatorial team of the 1993 biennial. So in a way, that is sort of how my curatorial life began. It was with those exhibitions. When I joined the Whitney in 1988 as a curatorial assistant, I came to the Whitney already having had the hope and aspiration of being a curator there. I went to high school on 77th Street between 2nd and 3rd. My best friend from high llewellyn is here, Alexandra Llewellyn Clancy. And while many days after school, we went to 59th Street and went to Bloomingdale's, when we weren't doing that, I was going to the Whitney Museum, which was down the street. Seeing the 81 and 83 biennials as a high school student gave me an idea of what I wanted to be. Not simply that I want to work in a museum, but that I wanted to be a contemporary art curator. And when I went to college, Smith alum has already identified herself. Oh, there's more than one, always. Smith in the house. I was committed to what it meant to think about, not just what it meant to study art history, but to understand museums. So that when it became possible for me to imagine an exhibition, what I was going to do, my first really exhibition, Black Male made complete sense. It was in response to what had been a generation of exhibitions which attempted and in many cases succeeded in defining the space of African American art. And I wanted to understand what it was to make a contemporary art exhibition that was defined by race and identity. So that Black Male included 28, 30 artists who were all working at the intersection of a conceptual practice that looked at race and gender as it was understood through history and the media. And it was a complicated show, but it was my first exhibition. So, in a way, I stepped into that complexity with an incredible amount of delusion, which has continued to serve me well, right? About what it
We
meant
count
to
on it.
kind of, make space in a place, in a context that had not been. And I am grateful to every artist who went along that journey with me. Gary Simmons is here. And, we were operating in a way where we understood that the world needed to shift. And I saw museums as the perfect place to be able to open up wider, deeper, different, complex conversations. And that's what Black Male did. Now, yes, the critics at the time, did not like it, but that actually wasn't the place in which I was looking for validation for the exhibition anyway. So that didn't stop me in some ways from continuing along this path.
So there's the critics later,
Hmm.
but it's a pretty bold thing. I mean, the Whitney had not
No.
done. I mean, the biennial
Hmm.
took risks,
Yes.
but I imagine it was a big conversation within the Whitney for this young curator to propose this race-based,
Hmm.
gender-based exploration, which I guess was also a research project for you to investigate it, or did you already know what you wanted to do specifically? Like, how was that inside?
Yeah. So inside, the Whitney of that era had an openness to discourse. So the conversation where I presented the idea was not a hard one. What was perhaps the hardest for me was to bring this very big topic into the form of an exhibition. And that's why Black Male lives as an exhibition and a catalog. They are actually corollaries to each other. And so much of it happened in collaboration with artists. Every single work in the exhibition, came through a conversation with the artists who were in the exhibition. And that's really how I got to shape the ideas into a form that could live in the galleries.
And did the reaction in getting to do that in your delusional way that you like, it does serve you well to be able to just do things. Did it change your perspective on what museums could do? Because it got a big reaction. I mean, it did change people's thinking about what was possible. Did it change your thinking about what was possible in this field?
Did it change my thinking? I think I operated from the moment I started working in this field that what I imagined could happen would,
Yeah.
very simply. And so the work was to make that real, to actualize it in real space. I was 27 years old. It was my first curatorial job. So, there's also that part as well. I had the sort of courage that youth
Yeah.
can bring. But I knew intuitively what the potential was, right? I always have worked from a place where I understand my work in the context of what's come before. So I wasn't the first Black curator who had ideas about making exhibitions in museums, but I was one of the few who was given the opportunity in a deeply full and profound way. And I knew that I had to make that not only in the form of the exhibition, but allow it to create much more possibility for others as well.
You were an intern at the Studio Museum in
Hmm.
Harlem
Hmm.
before that.
In
I
my
mean,
second year at Smith
it does
College,
seem all ordained, this path.
it is. It is.
How did, I mean, we're going to talk about mentorship
Mhm.
because it is one
Mhm.
of the things I think about when I think about you, but
Mhm.
you were mentored.
Mhm.
And so going to the Whitney,
Yeah.
you already had a sense of what was possible because of the Studio Museum and its thinking.
I did. So as I said, I was in the high school program at the Metropolitan Museum. So I spent my high school years first in the high school education programs, then as a high school intern. I worked in the American Decorative Arts department at the Met when the Frank Lloyd Wright room was being installed. And I went to college and wrote in my college essay that I wanted to be a contemporary curator at the Whitney. So, so,
See, it can happen for you.
so, um, while in college, I interned everywhere. And in my second year at Smith, I interned at the Studio Museum. And it was transformative for me because during my internship, I was made very aware by the director of the museum at that time, Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, the deputy director, Dr. Kinshasha Holman Conwell, the head of communications, Cheryl Lynn Bruce, and the rest of the staff, that much of what I was being taught and much of what I saw in museums was an incomplete story. So that made it so when I went back to Smith, I became a double major, art history and African American studies. And that perhaps was the most important thing that came out of that internship was my sense of real direct purpose in what work I could do. Now, I wouldn't have said to you when I was an intern that I would be the director of the Studio Museum one day, but I still have a note that Sherilyn Bruce, actress, cultural, luminary, partner of Kerry James Marshall, I interned for her and she wrote me a note, which basically kind of said, "You're going to be the director of the Studio Museum." And at the time, I thought that was just the nice thing she was saying to a young person, but it really was her ability to see what was possible for me that makes it now make total sense.
Well, the big news is not only you're a director, but you've kind of re-envisioned the Studio Museum. But I want to just because one of the pieces of press around the Studio Museum was the Harper's Bazaar article, which had across, I mean, it needed several pages, but 2 pages, all of these people that you mentored and were in major places in the world of art that we know in museums. Naima Keith just described that. She was in the photo. Other people who've worked at LACMA were in the photo. Um, I think you're known, I mean, you've mentored me. You're known in the field, I think, more than anyone as someone who's given of your own time and energy and thought about mentorship. One of our other trustees, Allison Berg, is here, I just see. And we've spent how many days and hours talking about issues of mentorship and how do people get to do what we do in this field. So was that does that come from that early experience or did you develop that later? Because it is really one of the hallmarks of your life and career, and we all feel it in such a positive way.
Well, thank you. I don't know that I call it mentorship. I mean, that to me is a very formal set of ways of being. That's not how I see it. I think for me, it came from the fact that, as I said, I always wanted to work in museums. And when I did and was able to do that, it became very clear to me that what it meant to enter these spaces had a lot to do with everyone tells you is required, but so much more. And I had been a great beneficiary of that, right? That understanding. And it always felt to me, that while I'm very proud that I was the first Black curator at the Whitney, I also found that to be the kind of conversation that I really didn't want us to continue to have. And so it always felt important to me to be of service to what it means to create opportunity in a mutual way. I mean, we both been privileged to work with Naima and so many others, and that's how I see it. And it has been important to me because it's also been a way in which I understand the work we do. I mean, I think a lot of times people think about museums as the physical spaces we build or the works we collect. But for me, it's been just as important to think about what we can do to make it possible for people who want to be in this field to have deeply profound, productive experiences. And then for me to personally champion them in ways that allows them to live in the world. Because there is a story. I mean, when I saw that picture in Bazaar, I had this moment where I thought, oh my God, wouldn't it have been great if all of them still worked at the Studio Museum? But actually, no, no. It wouldn't be. It is amazing that there are so many people in the world, who are doing this work.
Well, as Naima said, it's like museums are about people. I mean, the
Yes.
artworks represent people, they're made by people, it's people who make the decisions, and you've always been a people-centric person. I mean, we've gone through a reckoning, I mean, in the post-George Floyd era, especially about who works in museums. And I think that's one of the things you've been very pragmatic about the nature of opportunity. Because I will talk with you about that. And you're not just worried about somebody's graduate degree, you're worried about can they survive in New York? Do they know how they have to integrate into a world that's not necessarily the world they grew up in? It's super pragmatic, right? I'm always stunned by your approach to things that is um not abstract.
Right. Well, because we don't have time for abstraction, and the sort of reckoning that came to museums, I was like, hallelujah. I mean, many of us have been talking about this for a very long time. And the ability to be able to frame this conversation in ways that make everyone understand, I mean, listen. I hope everyone who's sitting here has been upstairs in these galleries. And I know you're asking me a question. The problem of being, friends for decades is, Michael asked me to do this. And I was like, well, why aren't we having a conversation?
We are.
Well,
We are.
no, you wanted to ask me questions. So I'm going to say, because I do want you all to join me, because I think, Michael, what you have done here is transformative in every way, right? When you walk through, yes, when you walk through these galleries and you understand the way in which you and the amazing curators here are shifting the ways that we tell stories about art, smashing through old hierarchies that have been in place for so long and kept so many ways of making by so many people at the margins, right? And you've created this sort of beautiful way to see and understand them. And that's what, for me, it means about having more people in this field. It creates excellence. How can our institutions be excellent if they continue to exist in one sort of narrow vision of what museum can be? And that's the legacy that I get to work with, because the founders of the Studio Museum in 1968, they knew this, right? That's why they created the Studio Museum. And so every day, I get to work in the legacy of people who understood museum in wider ways. And I continue to want that to be the case. And some of that is also by creating the opportunity for people to work in museums that come with perspective on what that means.
Our conversation has been a lot about how museums just get in their own way. That a lot
Always.
of what we've been just talking about for years is just open possibilities. Like the field has been hurting itself by not allowing for more possibilities, more
Right.
openness.
Right.
We've been doing that. It's kind of we laugh about the insular nature of the definitions that people work with. The unconscious bias is
Mhm.
extraordinary. There's so much of that bias. Like, so you just opened one of the most important museums in the world. You really redefined what was possible with the Studio Museum, even given its great legacy. And one of the things that was so powerful to me when you started your building project, and yes, we do spend most of our time talking about
Building buildings,
contractors,
exactly.
and
Exactly.
that's like,
Yeah.
how's it going?
Right.
We'll share a lot of those notes.
Mm-hmm.
But uh, your ambition, when you set out to rebuild that building, you set out with a great deal of ambition for architecture. We did too, but it's kind of expected. We're the Metropolitan Museum of Los Angeles. You're supposed to have a big building that reaches people and is a symbol of a city. But I feel like that idea, about as powerful as the Studio Museum was, there was a deep expectation in New York and the world that it should also stay
Yeah.
in its lane
Mm-hmm.
as an alternative institution. I remember that so clearly. Like,
Yeah.
wait, why are they? Isn't that against their mission to build a big building or
Mm-hmm.
a powerful, important building? And I was like, yes, of course. And maybe you could just address that, because this start of that project,
Yeah.
I mean, we had our own issues with the start of this one, but the start of that project had its own complications in terms of
Yeah.
unconscious bias and expectation.
Mm-hmm. It absolutely did. And, you know, one of the great gifts of this friendship is the ability to create space for those kinds of conversations. And so the Studio Museum had existed in a building that had been built in 1914 on 125th Street as a bank and an office building. The museum acquired it in 1979, so about 10 years after our founding, bought it and renovated it and made it into the museum. But it was a very old building that had constant maintenance needs, roof, you know, basement, everything. It just was a constant state of deferred maintenance that would kind of slap us in our face and we'd have to address. And the directors before me had done amazing work doing that. And when it came time to address what essentially was yet again another moment that the museum needed work, you know, almost everyone felt that I should pursue a renovation. And in very practical terms, that probably was right. We were about a $10 million a year operating institution with no endowment. I never built anything, but you know what it means to live in the ether, you know, of my colleague here was like, I was like, wait, why am I doing that? No, we're going to knock our building down and build a new building. And that sounded crazy, like in every single way. To many people I said it to, except for Michael, right? Who very much was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And that's because, you know, as you see. Um, right.
I was biased,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I could see it in your
Right,
case.
exactly. And a lot of the conversations that got me to be able to frame this very big jump, because that, you know, the building we built required a $300 million campaign that had never happened in our history. It required a huge amount of civic goodwill. You know, we're on 125th Street, what it meant to build. And then it required actually building. Now, what I will say is I am so proud of our new building. I absolutely
Who
love
has
it.
been to the new building?
Oh,
Who is going to the new building?
okay. Okay. I wasn't saying
Everyone.
this for the applause.
No,
What I
it's
was going to say
incredible.
is that I'm
I want to
thrilled
talk about
that
it.
we've just, you know, passed our 7-month mark, but like if I never built a building again, I'd be fine. Whereas Michael could build a building every week. Like his capacity for the complexity of construction is unmatched. And my capacity is like, I had so little of it. But I did, the building for me was a container for what had already been the soul of our institution that just didn't have a home that lived up to what it had already been. There had never been a moment. I remember when I first got to the Studio Museum, one of our colleagues who will remain nameless told me that I should hold off from creating a really great exhibition program because the building was so complicated that I should use the complexities as a way to push for this renovation to happen, but just hold off. And I sort of took the other approach. I thought, no, we have to do an amazing program in this building that is complicated to really make the case for what the ambition for the new building I hope we would build, but the new building we have would be. So, that was for me a means to an ends, but it also felt like I was fulfilling our founder's ambition. In 1968, we have an exhibition about our history, which meant going deep into our archive. And, my founders would have built a building in 1968 had they had the money, the opportunity, and what they had was an incredible amount of cultural capital. And that's why the museum was successful from the beginning. It was necessary. They had that. It just didn't have the space. So, in some ways, this building is also what I know they would have done if they could have back at our founding.
Um, without any experience building buildings, you built a beautiful building, and I know what that means. Like that, it's a very mundane, everyday thing to be managing it and get it to come out okay. It's not like one decision. The ambition you had was stunning to me because it's so powerful on 125th Street. What you've done is taken the methodologies and the thinking and made it clear that it is mainstream. It's in the center of thinking. Because I think a lot of the methodologies, a lot of what you've done, I mean, it's a blueprint for all of us in museums. When you go to the museum right off the street, there's also a fantastic, like the auditorium or people space is right there where people can hang out and sit and talk or experience an event like this right in the front. The staircase connects us. And the thing about the staircase, of course, it's about people too, because people see people. It's this social space and engagement, the opposite of the Whitney. Some people say it's a reference. There's a bit of reference to your
To,
life at the Whitney.
to the Breuer. No, there's a lot of the
Yes.
Breuer building, 945 Madison
And
in
it,
144 West 125th Street.
I know,
Absolutely.
and it's a nod to you and your history too, but that staircase where it's central and people see each other, and then the ambition of the galleries. We're showing slides of also you made a beautiful exhibition. I don't know how long it's going to be on view of the history of the Studio Museum that you curated. That a lot of these images are from, so you should go see that too. But the building itself has had this powerful effect. It's also public-private partnership, right? That the city of New York
Yeah,
was key to
exactly.
getting permissions as we had to build over Wilshire. It was key to financial support. It came at complicated times in New York politics. Can you say something about this connection that the Studio Museum has had deeply, I think, in New York politics and government?
Yeah, well, we are very fortunate in New York. Our Department of Cultural Affairs is a very well resourced agency that for years, hundreds of years actually, has created support not only for artistic programs in all kinds of arts institutions, but for big capital projects. And it's something that we all are very grateful for because it means that when you need to get your roof done, you can apply for that money or something as massive as our project. And so, like many capital projects, ours went through three administrations. So we began in the Bloomberg administration into de Blasio. We opened during the Adams, right at the end of the Adams administration. So it meant that this project had to go through reviews a couple of times, right, as we moved through. But we felt very grateful in all three of those administrations. There was a deep amount of commitment to what we were doing and to making that possible. Also, we are in something in New York called the Cultural Institutions Group, which are now about 39 institutions that get operating support from the city in the form of our power and water, but also in actual cash subsidy. And so being in the cultural institutions group also has made it so that the museum over its life has been able to grow in ways that I'm not sure would have been possible without this ongoing constant partnership with the city and with the Department of Cultural Affairs.
I think about your history at the Studio Museum and how after the Whitney, the blackmail show, you had landmark exhibitions at the Studio Museum. After dealing with race and gender and identity, you we credit, I think, some of your exhibitions with that the idea of post-black art, where the ambition grew, I think, at the same time you were thinking about the institution's role in the world. And of course, the Studio Museum is has art studios. And the Studio Museum has nurtured some of the most important artists in the world working today. So artists have been a real driving force for you. And as I think as you moved to the Studio Museum and had that ambition, this idea about like you think about international exhibitions everywhere, and so many of those artists started at the Studio Museum.
Yeah, and that's been part of the museum's history long before I got there, right? That was part of the founding mission, right? To create a place that would be a platform that would present the work, preserve the work, steward the work, collect the work of artists of African descent. And in doing so, over the museum's history, it has impacted not only the art historical canon writ large, but the collections and exhibitions of many institutions. And so that continues to be, for me, an important way to understand ourselves. But also, personally, as a curator, I was always an extremely artist centered curator. I always saw myself as a curator as like an active co conspirator with artists around what could be or what could happen. And so being able to have an institutional mission that already had that in its DNA has made it possible to continue, even in this new, bigger form, to have that be who we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that the generation of artists we've worked with ourselves has have helped us see how to reshape our institutions. I
Exactly.
mean, this institution is very much
Exactly.
dependent on artists who have framed it. Artists are reframing history and thinking about that all the time. And so I feel like we both spent a lot of time learning from artists, working with artists. Um, but in terms of artists, like you you were in that post-black moment, but a lot of institutions, we would joke about it, were still held back. When I got to LACMA, we did a simple count of the portraits
Hmm.
on view
Yeah.
at LACMA. Because if you're a school kid and you go to a museum, what do you see? Who do you see is a huge question.
Hmm.
And I asked for a demographic, we did a demographic survey of not the people who were coming to the museum, but because that was pretty diverse, but
Hmm.
it was what who
What's
was
on the
on the
wall?
wall.
Hmm.
Um, and it's shocking, right? Still in the 21st century, how that goes.
Hmm.
So, uh, in that post George Floyd moment, I know here we talked a lot about, well, what can be done because we were building our collections. We had a plan for a portraiture exhibition, which would address this
Hmm.
very question of
Yeah.
identity
Yes.
and the demographics of who's on view and who do you see when you come to a museum. And that resulted in Black American portraits, which was coincided with the Obama portraits being here,
Yep.
um,
Hmm.
which was amazing. So can we just talk about that for a minute? Because it's sort of still shocking. And we can talk a little about portraiture because you were involved. You were very close. You still are very close to the Obamas. You just got back um,
Some people were
from the
here,
Library Foundation.
there.
I know there are
Yeah,
others here.
we're
So
here.
let's talk about portraiture, the
Hmm. Hmm.
identity, our museums,
Hmm.
the slowness to adapt and understand and see ourselves.
Hmm. Yes. So, I know you've spoken about it in the context of portraiture. I know many people in this room will understand that. I can't go into a museum without counting, right? Now, some of you all know, right? The count, which means I'm always looking to see how institutions define the way, like if we call it a modern wing, a contemporary wing, an American art wing, who's there, right? Across genres, just who's there. Is there an abstract expressionism room? Is Norman Lewis there? I'm always going to look for that. And it's not shocking to me. It saddens me, right? That certain art histories that are well accepted still haven't always punctured the way in which institutions do tell stories on their walls. And that does have an impact, right? Because it continues to make the same stories the ones that continue to be understood. So that what I'm thrilled by, and we have many colleagues who have radically changed the way in which their galleries are hung, right? To be representative, race, gender. I mean, let's talk about, how many museums you could walk through full modern galleries and not see any women artists, right? And so to imagine artists of color, women artists, artists who work outside of what has long been considered fine art, right? Even those ideas, right? How that has been understood. So those shifts have been profound. And I feel thrilled that in my professional lifetime, I have been able to see those changes, right? In institutions I've gone to for my entire life. But it continues to require the kind of thinking that makes us commit to telling stories in our galleries that speak in a multi voiced way, that understand that we can never tell one history. We are telling parallel histories, that there have always been many things happening in the making of art at the same time. And that when we can do that, we are showing not a singular vision, but really allowing our visitors into the complexity of what the creative sphere creates in any given moment. And so that feels like an ongoing work, but I do think I feel thrilled to see what has happened that makes it more possible to see many of the artists who we all know did not see this in their lifetimes to have this happen now.
I mean, the Obama portraits, I think, was a spark. They were,
Mhm.
they're so
Yeah.
famous, obviously.
Well, it's
It,
because they were, made by contemporary artists, which has been the case in the past, but not perhaps with the same kind of understanding in the public realm. And that was what was important about that project. And its resonance continues, right? The way in which those portraits live in the public imagination.
you were involved. You obviously know the Obamas. You were actually formally involved with the
Hmm.
White House and
Hmm.
helping to be an advisor in
Hmm.
art.
Hmm.
They're among the first
Hmm.
lady who took contemporary art very
Hmm.
seriously and made that part of the program.
Hmm.
And you were part of that
Hmm.
thinking.
Hmm.
How did that go? I mean, did they come with that because they've
Hmm.
used the
Hmm.
presidential's the center
Hmm.
now? It's all the articles are writing about the
Right.
fact that there's a lot of contemporary art artists from Los Angeles
Yes.
are
Yeah.
were
No,
commissioned.
amazing commissions. Yeah. Yeah. I know they believe that artists are important to the way we understand our world. They are important to the democratic process and project. They live as those who not only narrate into our experience, but give us the space to engage it. And so that always felt important. And now in the presidential center, that is made so tangible in the commissions that live all through the space, indoors, outdoors, and all,
Yeah,
through the
can you say
building.
a little more about how those function? Because that was part of the building
Mhm.
program from the
Yeah.
beginning, and it's so unusual again in a
Yeah. Well,
presidential center.
yeah, well, what it does, most of them are in public space, and really what it becomes is it's a presidential center that also embedded in it is this incredible contemporary art collection. So that one's visit there, you get to encounter some incredible, amazing works of art while also engaging in what the museum, the Presidential Center Museum, does to tell the story of the administration.
So it's a kind of, I don't know, I was reading the articles and it seems I wasn't there, but it does seem a bittersweet moment, this amazing
Mhm.
accomplishment.
Yeah. Mhm.
Art played a big role in their thinking about what
Mhm.
was possible in
Mhm.
society and how to communicate to people bigger potential. Um, and yet we're living in a moment where I don't, it does seem like it's uncertain
Mhm.
that we've talked about the fact that there has been a certain
Mhm.
retrenchment, retreating to some kind of norm of the past in even in museums. Um, we've talked about identity. Not only are you running an institution devoted to Black art, but you're a woman running an institution. A lot of women running institutions have had a tough time right now. It doesn't seem like I mean, we progress in lurches, but it does seem like there are still fundamental infrastructural problems in perception.
Right, and that's what makes the work so important. In a way, I feel like, so many people asked me, we opened in November of 2025, and so many people said, oh, isn't it hard to be opening the Studio Museum now? And, my thought about that is that we opened originally in September of 1968. So, like literally a group of people starting in 1965 were sitting around a table as this country was imploding, saying, we are going to make an art museum in Harlem devoted to Black artists. So our opening now really, for me, again, I had to just continually reach for, what clearly was the spirit of that moment to say that, yes, it is important that we are existing as a Black institution. And I say that consistently as a Black institution, creating Black space in a Black community, understood as both past and present, but also this moment and being open now. And the work that I've been doing in this moment for me is about this moment, but is also about what it means to create futures. And that's what I felt our founders did. In 1968, Black artists were protesting museums all around this country because of the exclusion. And my founders were not in the either or. They said, well, yes, we need to do that. We've got to open these institutions, but we also need to create institutions that fully exist within the context, right, of Black culture. And so I feel that way in this moment of erasure, like absolute erasures, attempts at erasures to Black history and culture. To be a Black institution right now, there's nothing more important. Mm.
I I feel that with you, of course. And as we were even building this building, and a lot of the criticism came from this idea of what does it mean, no hierarchies? Or what do you mean when you're not going to have your specific galleries of this country or that country or this type of art as you had it? And I think it is that we are more important than ever as institutions because it is true if you can see, if you can erase that sense of other as othered, there's a lot of potential for how museums can play a role in that society. Where let's talk about museums. So we live in this world of museums. Of course, there are many artists here, and we're here because of artists. We follow artists. We learn from artists. Our entire organization is around artists and artwork. And then we live in this weird space of creating museums. The frame. As I always say, the frame is, you have to think of it as malleable. Like art's been around for tens of thousands of years, museums for whatever, a couple hundred years, and they're so malleable and changeable and should be because we have to keep thinking about how to make art connect with our world. So many of the things in this building weren't meant for museums, certainly. Now artists make things for museums. But what do you think is our maximum potential? Where do we go? Where should we put our energy as museum makers?
I think while the Studio Museum is a museum that collects, and I'm very proud of our collection, over 8,000 works of art of artists of African descent and works inspired by Black culture, I really think our energy should consistently be around our program, meaning how we serve our audiences, how we are able to make narrative in exhibition, in program. And so, for me, and it is a dilemma because, like any good museum director, of course, I covet artworks all the time. Like want more, 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 more. But I also understand that in some ways I wonder, like, is that ultimately, right, our only role? And I know it's not because I see the way in which, our audiences don't read wall labels in a way that they are making distinctions between the works we own versus the works we borrow versus, they're making distinctions about what it is we are presenting and how it gives them space to have wonder and awe and inspiration. So I feel in museums that, a lot of where our growth probably needs to be is in the space where we understand how we program in our buildings, but also how, because of technology and geography, we can exist in other ways and forms. And I know that's something you've thought about for a long time, that this campus is not just fixed, but that there are lots of ways you can be. While we were closed, as you know, our building project took a little bit longer than we hoped. So we were closed for 7 years, which felt like 70, really. like such a long time to be closed. But it meant that for 7 years we existed without a building. And I have to say, I love that moment. I love the way that we could, embody museum in lots of different ways that weren't about a physical space, weren't about a collection being presented in a static way. And I just feel like that's a future in many ways, and one that I keep thinking about. Well, how do we continue to more intentionally move towards that?
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting question because we bounce back and forth between the idea that the program and the art is
Mhm.
central, and we burden ourselves
Mhm.
often with too much infrastructure because the biggest numbers, of course, go to security and building
Keeping the
operations and
lights
all
on,
those things and
literally.
keeping. And so we always wrestle with that because, on one hand, yeah, isn't it about the art and the people and the
Mhm.
program? And couldn't you live?
Yeah,
And a lot of alternative arts institutions have been born on that basis.
exactly.
On the other hand, your building, this building,
Mhm.
they represent lasting touch points
Absolutely.
for people. They create memory,
Mhm.
they create consistency.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess I've been thinking a little bit the opposite. I used to think, oh, that's great. And we had our mobile, where's Naima? We had our mobile art truck there, and we have the Maya Mobile and the World Mobile,
Mhm.
and it moves around with our teams over
Mhm.
there
Mhm.
to different neighborhoods. We have in a gallery at Charles White Elementary School. We program at the county fair every year. But then I've been thinking about all these areas, like the Valley is 1.3 million people, and there's no place to lend an artwork to because if you want Gary's artwork to go there, it's got to have a little climate control and some lighting and some other things. And so I guess I've been sort of thinking the opposite that maybe we need more physical infrastructure in places where there isn't. So at LACMA, we're talking about that.
Right, building more buildings.
I know we're going to build more
Me,
buildings,
no, not
but
me.
that's the, I know, I want to say, like, is it bad? Is it good?
It's
I'm not,
okay. You can it's okay. I mean, see, that's what makes this work, right? Go for it. Absolutely. Go for it. Yeah. Mhm.
is it, but it is a conundrum and it's very
Yes.
expensive to build museums. It requires
Absolutely.
such commitment of people,
Mhm.
in our case, both public
Mhm.
and private
Mhm.
funding, commitments to endowments. Um, and we can lose our way
Mhm.
with all of that weight. And
Mhm.
yet, if we don't have the infrastructure like this place where you can do events like this or
Mhm.
have an art parade or
Mhm.
music or dance,
Yeah.
I think communities suffer without those central
Mhm.
spaces.
No, I think the spaces are necessary, and certainly, there's a different way that, my trajectory could have gone, if there were dozens and dozens of museums devoted fully to the work of artists of African descent. Might have taken a different path. But I also, it was important for me to create something that not only served the Studio Museum, but set a precedent for what institution building could mean and look like for culturally specific institutions, many of whom have done excellent work with no infrastructure
Right.
for generations, right? So to kind of push out of that and create this possibility and opportunity, and even the design of our building was meant. As you know, we worked with Ajay Associates and Cooper Robertson, and I really worked hard with them to think about, how do we make a space that really speaks to not just our purpose, but our aspiration as well. That you would feel that in the physical space, of the museum, because it wasn't even symbolic. I mean, it was very important to give a physical space with ambition and aspiration attached to it, to Harlem, to 125th Street.
Which is essentially what Jaron Walker at the Ford Foundation said when he was funding our research for South Los Angeles and for this idea of creating more infrastructure so that we could share more of our existing assets and our collections there, that it created that sense of focus, aspiration. I mean, you can see that in Lauren Halsey's park right now, where I was just recently, yesterday, partly. Um, that sense of needing physical places to gather people. And I think more and more about that. It's the nature of culture and parks. I love park space. I mean, 125th, it's its own cultural space, right? It's a neighborhood that's meaningful. And even when people complain, oh, the building's too expensive, I think, why is it too expensive? We put more people to work. We fed more families through construction work. Shouldn't our world have more cultural infrastructure? Shouldn't there be more spending on that and then creating the frame for programs? You're doing that.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think this is what, the sort of, the kind of mutual project that we've been involved in, right? How to think out loud and act in ways that not only experiment, but allow a level of intention about what museums can be to be legible to our audiences so that they can be a part of helping, right? Think through what museums are and what they can be as opposed to staying in some kind of ivory tower, right, where we might be thinking about the museum of the future that isn't attached to anything other than some kind of museological thinking.
Um, there are people in this audience who are with us in sort of building our institutions, artists, others. So there may be a few
Questions?
questions. Tell us, Thelma, like with this new
Uh-huh.
infrastructure, what do you envision for the Studio Museum in terms of the use of the infrastructure? Because I know we're testing this place
Hmm.
every day. What can it do? Can it hold 100,000 people like
Yeah.
yesterday? Um, do you have a do you have some things you're going to be testing with your new infrastructure?
Yeah, we already have. But, one of the things, Michael, that's so interesting for us is that, and I know there are many people in this room who, fondly love the old Studio Museum. And when I say our reality was that the museum was literally one space and everything we did happened in the same space, exhibitions, public programs, events. All were in the same space. So, a lot of what we've been doing is just learning how to exist with a simultaneity that we never had before. I walk in some days and I still can't believe that we can have a hands-on art making workshop in the workshop while having a program on the stoop, while having gallery talks in the gallery, while people can be walking around and also perhaps there could be a community group in our fifth floor loft space having an event. Right? That all of that is happening at the same time, and that's just one 2 hour block. So for us, we've been just really getting used to what it means to have capacity, right? To be able to live into the dream we had when we designed the building, which was filled with practicalities. I mean, we didn't have a loading dock, right? I am very excited. We have a loading dock.
We have two now. We didn't
Right.
have one.
And like, the idea
Love
that the
that.
loading dock, like
Museum director's favorite thing
right,
is
that a
always the
truck
loading
can
dock.
drive in to the loading dock. Like, so whenever it happens, I want to see it. It's like amazing to me to see that, and we have a
We
real,
share the same
yes,
passions.
it's so funny because normally on Sundays I send Michael a text, happy Sunday, because it's really a way to say we got through another week of museum directoring. And I feel like we're having this conversation here with all of them. But loading dock also, for me, it's also significant when I think about the ways in which our current space have been able to already adapt in ways that our audience has created, right? So now, when people say to me, oh, when I'm on 125th Street, I come into the museum and I sit on the stoop and I do my emails for an hour. Or they say, oh, we do, Saturday morning story time every week. Like the way in which already what we do is embedded in people's ideas of the neighborhood. And that's been fantastic. In terms of a future, now that we have these spaces, um, we're really working hard to reimagine our program in these spaces. For a long time, exhibition making was a creative act for us, right? Because and I never call them limitations, and I always feel bad talking bad about the old building, because I loved that building,
We yeah. You can
like
love
loved,
things that aren't what
loved, like
they can
in
be.
every way, and I get so much nostalgia for what that space, used to occupy. And, I've had the occasion to be in the building many times over these months and years of building it with the director, Dr. Mary Schmidt Campbell, who acquired the building in 79 and moved us into it in 81. And, one of my favorite things with Mary is we stand in different parts of the new building and talk about what used to be there. right? And because it's almost hard to imagine the old building in the space of the new building. And so a lot of it also too is about not just what our future is in terms of what we can do, but it's also how we maintain what has always been the deep sense of spirit that existed in that former space, and that we continue to be able to work in ways that make that present and palpable in the space that we're in now.
Yeah. No, I see that when I'm there at the space and it's functioning. And I guess it's the same problem on a slightly
Mhm.
different scale.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
possibility for
yeah,
this simultaneity, what we're doing here. There was a dance performance, there's an art parade, there'll be another event afterwards. And there's this sense that, museums have become these community gathering spaces. That is our role more and more and more, it seems. And I think that's what you've done so
yeah.
beautifully.
Hmm.
Do we have some questions over here? Okay.
Thank you for a great talk. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask, as you say yes to so many things, what do you have to say no to and why?
Yeah, I don't even like, how do you even answer that? I mean, I feel like, yes, we say less to a lot of things. I am constantly trying to work from a place of possibility so that to create enough space to make a lot of things possible, but there still are limits, I mean, and so a lot of, I don't know if I would say so much it's what we say no to, it's about staying in mission in a really strict way so that what we do can happen with strength and depth, right? As opposed to the widening that, in our case, the new space could allow, that perhaps would not give us that chance, right? To be as rigorous about what we do. So it's less about saying no, it's more about staying deeply in mission and always sort of touching what it means to say, is this like making mission manifest in this program project idea?
Um, yes, and saying no is a big part of it. Like you're shaping, sculpting something. There are many things we're always saying no to.
Hi, my name's Mila. I actually went to the Studio Museum a couple weeks ago,
Thank
so
you.
thank you for your work as well. So I live in LA and I'm an artist researcher. I am coming from like a sciences background, and obviously we've seen a lot of like talk about AI, technology. I know LACMA has like a science, arts, technology kind of interdisciplinary program, but I'm curious how both of you guys, from like a programming standpoint, are looking to kind of re-merge the sciences and the arts because I don't think they're at odds. Some of our favorite scientists were artists.
Yes.
So I'm just curious to know what you guys are doing from a programming perspective, even like exhibitions as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that we have a specific exhibition that answers that yet. As I said, we are beginning what is this new life of programming, but it lives right at the center of the ways that we are now talking about, where our program can address these issues with, of course, with mission there. So, what does this mean when we're talking about artists, scientists of African descent? What do these conversations mean in our community? How can we bring more ability to have not just the research, as you're saying, but execute in ways that allow for more of a space for dialogue, right? In this present, that we are all living in.
And it's we're saying in LA we have because we have this old tradition of art and science through the art and technology program of the 60s. We've remade that initiative. Today we have an art and tech lab. There's a book that just got published. It's so interesting to read both books from the 60s, which is all white men on the cover. Just a note. To the diversity of ideas and engagement with science. And so we've made that a big part of the program here. Actually, the next musical event is with one of our art and tech artists who was working with Gaussian splats and took over our webpage not long ago. So we have a LACPA Digital Leaders Initiative. So it's mostly digital, but the art and science thing is very big in LA because, of course, LA has those sciences. So it's actually been one of the exciting things for me about being here in the midst of all these science institutions, Caltech and even the observatory and the Natural History Museum right here. We're always talking about art and science. And, we at one point in our museum histories, we separated art and science as different things. Because in the old days, you would have a dinosaur bone and a painting and everything else together. And then we thought, oh, we have to separate the disciplines. Interestingly, LACMA was the last of the American museums to be separated out as an art museum in 65. But we find ourselves next to the La Brea tar pits, which is why the building crosses Wilshire, because the scientists wanted more room to excavate. We found 13 saber-toothed tiger skulls when we when we excavated here. So we have this dialogue with the Natural History Museum, our sister, and it's a cool thing about LA that there's this wonderful back and forth. And I do think we would do well to merge more of that thinking again as we are. Um, any other? Okay, right here. Oh, sorry. One and then another up front.
Hello, I wanted to say congratulations on completion on both the museums. And my question is, what projects are you guys working on next that you're passionate about?
Yeah, so we are working really hard on, again, thinking about the ways that we can look at our past exhibition history to be able to more fully tell the stories that still don't live as known, right, about Black artists. So the first project in that will launch this fall is a book that we are publishing from our archive with Dr. Romy Crawford, who is an art historian based in Chicago. And it is to really see that the archive holds so many stories of artists, arts institutions, arts activists that are names that are not known, events that happen that are sometimes being recreated now as new. So I'm excited about this moment for us at Studio Museum as being one that we are creating our future, but it's also giving us the chance to go back and honor the past and the many people who were lifting up Black artists and ideas for generations that still have not been written into the history.
Yeah, I think we share this idea that, I mean, even among our staff, we talk about this is not an endpoint. This is actually the beginning. We have a new platform, new tools, the simultaneity I think Thelma was talking about of how you can have different events. This building is a machine to create new knowledge just because now you have curators working together across disciplines and thinking in completely different ways. And so I it is very palpable, our personal, when we talk excitement about now what's possible with these new platforms and tools. And it is true. The next thing we will do, and we've already started, we just had a meeting with the county last week, is we plan to make another LACMA in South Los Angeles. The site is well known in the press already, so it's not a secret. It's at Magic Johnson Park. The county's worked with us, changed the EIR. And the idea is that we would have the possibility to just sort of extend our programs, our collections, that accessibility. And part of it is we're just missing out on so much by being just here. Like, think about the talent and the energy in, LA is just so big. And if it's an hour away, they're just so I'm also excited about that. We will not be experimenting here, but the idea is we'll continue our infrastructure. And that's part of my thinking about what is a metropolitan museum. In the 19th century, you all had a small city. You put the city hall and you put the museum in the center. But now we live in these sprawling metropolises, 11 million people spread out of, I forget how many square miles in LA County. And so I think we have to constantly be questioning this frame for art, this museum thing. I don't think of it as fixed at all, even though most of the architecture of the past of museums does everything to connote fixity and authority. Hopefully this building does that a little less with the glass, the transparency, and the horizontality. And then the idea is if we can really decenter not just art history, but we can decenter the museum infrastructure itself. So we're continuing to work. We had a question here.
I'm an HBCU graduate, and I noticed that when I was in undergrad, I didn't see a lot of museums coming in. So I'm just wondering, what is the Studio Museum doing for like HBCUs and also with online programming? Because I really enjoy the ones at LACMA. So that's my question.
Okay, so HBCUs, we've had a long relationship to. It's been, we live within the same context of Black institution. So that our relationship to the HBCUs that have art programs, art history programs show up in our internships, our fellowship programs, and often in the exchange between those that have museums. And we see that as very important work and really important collection. In terms of online programming, of course, we began deeply programming online during the pandemic, as many people did. And then because we were closed, we haven't been doing as much now because, again, we are living so deeply in this first year of being physically back in the building. But what even the first 6 months have made us understand is that there's a desire for those who can't come to Harlem to still be able to connect. So we've been building out our infrastructure to be able to have a whole separate kind of program that exists online that gives the experience of what it means to be in the museum, whether in the exhibitions. So you'll see some of that now on our website and video content of the exhibitions in a sort of podcast series we have. So we currently have an exhibition up called Fade. It is the 5th or 6th, I should know that by heart now, 6th in a series of exhibitions of emerging artists. And we created some content around that so that there could be an experience of the exhibition if one couldn't come to the museum.
Thelma Golden, just thank you so much for coming out and speaking and educating us all. I've seen you at Columbia in Chicago, UCLA here, and I just learned so much. Bringing up historical things too with contemporary things, that's important as well. And I just wanted to say thank you to LACMA. I was walking in the modern art exhibit rooms over here, and I saw a Harlem Renaissance artist added to the modern art exhibit. I just stood there like this. I couldn't believe it because I'm an art historian, and people don't realize how left out, one could feel. And to just see it was just a shock. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. And as you have today, I am always learning from
listen,
Thelma Golden.
It's mutual. Listen, it's absolutely mutual. I mean, 30 years of talking about museums, thinking about museum, being able to kind of envision together has been a gift. So thank you for that.
We are so lucky you exist in our world and you're here today. So thank you, Thelma
And
Golden.
thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes.